Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on our 2024 calendar, Federal Funding Avenues for State Brain Injury Programs and Partners, offered by the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. Thank you so much for joining us. Next slide, Zeta, please. I'm Maria Crowley with NASHIA, your moderator, and next slide. Closed captioning is available by enabling it at the bottom of your viewing window. If you need any assistance for today's webinar, please send a chat to us through Zoom or go directly to Zoom's support site. Questions for the presenters can be added to the Q&A in your viewing window or to Zoom's support or to the chat, and we'll be monitoring those closely and sharing those as we go. So we welcome questions from you. And then if we have additional questions, we'll save those for the end. Next slide. NASHIA is a nonprofit organization, in case you're not familiar with us, that's created to assist state government in promoting partnerships and building systems to meet the needs of individuals with brain injury and their families. NASHIA is also a membership organization, and we offer several different membership categories. We would love to have you as a member. Please view our website for all of the options. There are many benefits to membership, including a connection to our directory and free trainings and reduced costs for some of our webinars and workshops as well. You can find out more by emailing us at any time. And in addition to numerous training opportunities, NASHIA offers technical assistance and consulting services on a number of topics, some of which are listed in front of you now. You can also find out more about these by emailing us. So, enough of housekeeping and logistics. I would like to introduce you to today's presenters who are going to empower you and your partners to investigate and secure diverse funding for brain injury services and supports. We have Derek Fales, who is NASHIA's co-chair for the Public Policy Committee and who works as the Brain Injury Services Program Manager and Waiver Services Director for Maine's Department of Health and Human Services, which sits within the Office of Aging and Disability Services. We also have Zeta Ricker, NASHIA's other co-chair of the Public Policy Committee, and she serves as Director of Strategic Partnerships and Policy. Welcome. I will leave you in their capable hands.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Like Maria said, my name is Derek Fales. I work for the state of Maine, and I am pleased to be here and talking with all of you virtually. So please do leave us some questions in the chat that will help us to be as interactive as possible as we go through today's presentation. So this slide really is, at least from my perspective, so on the left side is some tips about working with other state agencies. And I think you can use these tips as you think about if you're a provider agency and how can you talk with your state about needs or ideas that you have to help improve systems and to leverage federal funding. So first, I always try to make sure that I know who the decision maker is. So who is that decision maker within each of the state agencies? As far as policy is there a single Medicaid agency that has a policy director? Who's the finance person? And then who is the operations person? So who are those decision makers? So if I have an idea and I want to think about how am I going to get that idea to move forward, I need to know who do I need to go to first to sell my idea and then to help partner with me to make that grow. Part of that really also for tips is to think about what your timeframes are. So anybody who's working in the state side, there are always a number of timelines that we have to manage, such as legislative timeframes. So if we need appropriations, if we need to ask our legislatures for money to help fund our idea and to get this program and project off and running, then we need to think about what those timeframes are so that we can put together a proposal if it has to go to the legislature. Another great tip that I always try to keep in my mind is to really have that one project lead, to make sure that as we're talking about our idea and how we're working as multiple state agencies working together, who is that one lead person? Who's that person that everybody can connect to make sure that they're scheduling meetings, to make sure that there's version control for documents, and to help things run smoothly. So some examples of some innovative funding mechanism in Maine. So in Maine, we really leveraged our HCBS or our Home and Community-Based Services Improvement Plan. That's under Section 9817 of the American Rescue Plan Act, also known as ARPA. And specific to brain injury, it's really, we were able to put together a proposal, had agreement with our Medicaid agency and our commissioner of the Department of Health and Human Services to purchase 10 accessible dwelling units. So this is through an outfit in Vermont called WheelPads. We're able to think about that, limited one-time funding to help move our ideas forward, as well as to help us to develop a community-based neurobehavioral treatment center. So when you're thinking about how do we get to using those fundings, it really started with an idea. It really started with mapping out what that idea would look like, where we wanted to be to supporting people with brain injuries in the community, and then what those available fundings were. We also have family support funds. So individuals, there's a set aside some funds supported by our legislature with general funds so that there's an application process of individuals who need support, who don't have services or living in their communities can access these funds, as well as brain injury core services. This is another legislative mandate that actually come from the community. So that it was the community that came together, had a sponsor, and that's in the legislature that developed this law that talks about brain injury core services. And then finally, some funding that is, I think is always a great option is the Medicaid funding under state plan amendments and home and community-based services. So that's just a few tips from me, and I'll pass it over to Zeta.
Thank you, Derek. It is really nice to be here with all of you virtually, and I really appreciate Derek's comments and setting the stage for us. He really is a leader in thinking innovatively about the different types of opportunities there are out there, and provided some really great tips as we think through the different types of funding opportunities that I'm going to be talking about today. As Maria mentioned, I'm Zeta Ricker. I am the Public Policy Co-Chair and the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Policy for NASHIA. And today we're going to talk about how funding is everywhere, really, and you just have to think creatively about how to leverage those dollars to support brain injury services and supports. Particularly right now, the federal government has been flooded with a lot of dollars, and it's really a ripe opportunity to be able to think about the different ways that you can utilize those. So today I'm going to be talking about these few different opportunities. None of these are direct grants that you would apply for kind of to a grant program in the federal government. There are many grants across the federal government, and look forward to chatting about those in a future conversation. But today we really wanted to focus on ways that you could partner with other state agencies or think creatively about different opportunities. As Maria mentioned, please feel free to put questions in the chat or the Q&A throughout, and I will try and pause every once in a while so that she can help to share some of those questions.
Zeta, we've got a question already that
Okay.
you guys may just want to refer to as you're working through some of the information that you're sharing from Harris. So how do you get past online comments and questions and forms and websites to get to an actual human if you've got questions?
It's a great question. I'm curious, Derek, your thoughts on that.
That is a great question. I know how people reach me if it's at the state agency level is that they tend to go to our website, find out, Google, find out my name, and then they actually call the switchboard at the state of Maine, and then it actually goes directly to me. So there definitely are there are states and other agencies that really would prefer emails or these forms, but there's always other ways to try to reach somebody. You just really have to sometimes do a little bit of Googling to figure out who that person is at the state, and then how do you get their phone number.
We'll also be sharing resources for every one of the opportunities that we're going to talk about today in follow-up. And with some of these where we might recommend that you reach out directly to a certain state agency, we have contact information for who that is within the state. So you can have a direct point of contact for those. Okay, so I'm going to dive in. I always like to say you can't win if you don't play when it comes to federal funding opportunities. Understand, and NASHIA understands totally that capacity can be a huge challenge for states, and you absolutely need to prioritize where you're going to spend your resources. We know many states are taking very small pots of money, leveraging them to do amazing things. And so throughout this, as we're providing the ideas for different opportunities, we want to be a partner in helping to go after these different opportunities and helping you to build the capacity that you need to be able to seek these other opportunities. So understanding that we know that capacity is a challenge, it is also important to try and think creatively and go after different opportunities, and you really have to participate in the process to be able to benefit from it. So I'm going to kick things off by talking about the first opportunity that we wanted to share today. This is actually a little bit unique in that it is not a direct funding opportunity, but an opportunity to get some services and supports for free. So the Center for Medicaid Services has two opportunities for free technical assistance. The first is focused on person-centered practices support. The National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems, or NCAPS, provides some technical assistance for folks. And right now they do have an opportunity for some short-term technical assistance for states as they're looking to implement their person-centered planning work consistent with the Home and Community-Based Services final rule. We know that there are some additional considerations for people with brain injury as you consider person-centered planning, and it might be a good opportunity to receive some free technical assistance for that. CMS also works with new additions to offer technical assistance to states on the different types of waivers, exploring what waiver might be most beneficial for a state, understanding the different options out there. And again, this is technical assistance that is no cost to the state to help you explore and work through these things. And NASHIA helps to support some of the technical assistance if there's a brain injury lens. So through these two TA opportunities, we've been able to help support Georgia, Utah, Colorado, Ohio, Kansas, Nebraska, and Virginia with some of their Medicaid and waiver work. There is an application for both of these opportunities, and there does need to be buy-in from your Medicaid director in submitting the application. So if this is something you're interested in exploring, we definitely recommend that you discuss your goals with your Medicaid director and partner with them to formulate a strong TA request, and then submit the TA request And there is a little bit more limited options right now. Both of the opportunities are only available through this fiscal year currently. But we are hopeful that if you are interested, you'll be able to receive some TA from this. We will be sharing in follow-up to this the applications for both of the TA centers. Before I go on to talking about the next opportunity, Maria, is there any questions in the chat on this?
I see a comment from Becky, which is a good suggestion. Oftentimes, federal and state agencies host Q&A sessions affiliated with opportunities. This can be a great way to connect directly with the appropriate state and federal employees, and I agree. Do you?
That is a great suggestion, yes.
And Chris added something in the chat, Chris Miller from Virginia, about Virginia's Medicaid agency using one of those options from CMS to help develop options for the brain injury waiver, and it was a great resource, so good to know.
Thanks for sharing, Chris. Okay, the next opportunity that I wanted to highlight is focused on vocational rehabilitation dollars. As many of you know, states are given formula funding grant for VR to help support people with disabilities in engaging in employment activities. The states do have to apply for this funding each fiscal year, but then are allocated a formula funding amount for it. Many states have not been able to fully utilize their dollars, and so they return dollars back to the federal government. And this has become an increasingly important for the federal government that states think creatively about how to fully utilize those dollars. We understand that VR directors and VR agencies are also dealing with a lot of challenges as they think through this, but do see a lot of opportunity for brain injury to be a focus of some of the funding dollars. In a moment, I'm going to kind of give some examples of how you might want to consider partnering with your VR agency. We know that many states are already partnering with VR. Some are even located in the brain injury program is located within VR. And so I'm sure there's lots of great examples for some of you on the call as well. Another opportunity, though, with those returned dollars that the federal government gets, they have put together a disability innovation fund, which is a grant program where states would apply for funding and then be awarded dollars. And those have a specific topic focus typically and provide a little bit more flexibility. We are expecting that grant opportunity will come out sometime this spring and are hopeful that it could again be another opportunity for states to consider supporting people with brain injury through that. So I just wanted to put that out as something to keep an eye out for. But for today's purposes, I'm going to focus on some ways you might want to consider partnering with your VR agency. So here are some suggestions, and Maria is really an expert in this, so feel free to fill in things that I'm missing, Maria. But some ways that states could use their dollars are to ensure that VR counselors and other service providers are brain injury informed, helping to support supported employment services for people with brain injury, supporting screening within the VR system, focusing on specific employment strategies for people with brain injury, supporting peer mentoring from others with brain injury who have gotten services and supports, increase the availability of job retention for people with brain injury, and support pre-employment transition services or pre-ETS towards encouraging school-age youth with brain injury to prepare and seek employment. the way that VR dollars work, you do have some specific rules and parameters of the types of things that you can spend the dollars on, but these are some examples that we know fit within those requirements that could provide additional opportunities to support people with brain injury. Nebraska has done some really exciting things related to brain injury within their VR system, including by helping to ensure that their VR counselors are brain injury informed and have brain injury competencies, focusing on supported employment services for people with brain injury, and screening and having a universal screening approach to their VR system. So in order to explore this opportunity, we again really recommend that you reach out to your VR director or team. And again, like we said, we know some of you have really great established relationships with VR or located in VR, and so you may not need to provide that education on brain injury, but for others, it might be helpful to give some brain injury background, give some recommendations on how to utilize those VR dollars. And then again, there is an application that states have to apply for each year to utilize these dollars. So you could work with your VR team to ensure that there is mention of brain injury or some of those dollars within their application, highlight that. States do have some flexibility though, so even if you're not within the application cycle, we still recommend that you reach out because states have some flexibility on how they can spend their dollars. There could be opportunity even within their current funding to support people with brain injury. And then this is one where I also see a long view, a long plan, because every state also puts together state plans for voc rehab. And so even just starting the conversation, even if it doesn't move forward for this cycle or the next kind of funding cycle, it gives you an opportunity to influence their state plan and hopefully integrate brain injury supports for seeking employment within that setting. I think that's all for this. Marie, do we have any questions in the chat on this one, or do you have things to help fill in?
No questions so far. If you have perhaps tried to access those funds, it might be helpful to know. You could share your experiences with us if you have some unique routes that you have gone in terms of utilizing those dollars. Seda, I think you hit on every single point though.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, would love to hear state examples. We love learning from each other. Okay, the next opportunity we wanted to chat about is opioid settlement dollars. I know it might seem like we're going all over the place. That's really just because there's funding so many different places, and we wanted to take the opportunity to highlight a few different ones, but it's certainly not exhaustive list. Every state is getting some money from the opioid settlement, you probably heard about in the news, and every state is getting a different amount of money. In the follow-up materials that we share, we'll send information on how much money the state has gotten, what they are allocating their dollars so far on, and their kind of process of how they're allocating the dollars. But every state's process is a little bit different, but it is still early on in the process. So most states do have funding through this. And states are required to spend at least 70% of their dollars on these different activities, which include expanding warm handoff services to transition to recovery services, broadening the scope of services for co-occurring substance use disorder and mental health conditions, providing comprehensive wraparound services, hiring additional social workers or other behavioral health workers, and providing evidence-based treatment and recovery support, including for co-occurring conditions or for supporting people transitioning out of the criminal legal system. And this is also not an exhaustive list, but just some of the things that we thought could really lend an opportunity to integrate brain injury support. So some ideas of things that you might want to consider if you're interested in these dollars is integrating screening for brain injury, supporting resource facilitation, ensuring that mental and behavioral health and substance use disorder providers are brain injury informed. We know that some states are talking about or thinking through some things like securing consultation and implementation of brain injury support and services, or working with consultants to support collaboration across state agency systems, supporting the specific needs of criminal legal involved individuals with substance use disorder, including some brain injury resources, and then again, providing wraparound services, including for people with brain injury. Every state is required to put together an opioid advisory committee. In some states, the opioid advisory committee is the ultimate decision maker on how the dollars are spent. In some states, they provide recommendations to the governor's office or a specific department within the state. So really, as a first step, we recommend reaching out to the opioid advisory committee. Again, depending on your state, you may need to provide more education on brain injury. You may not need to, but it's an opportunity to give some recommendations on how you might want to utilize those dollars and coordinate with other state agencies to do some of the work. Again, sometimes the opioid advisory committee has final sign off. Sometimes you might have to work with the opioid advisory committee to be included in a list of recommendations and then go directly to the governor's office or some other office to highlight the different ways that those dollars could be spent. Okay, any questions there, Maria?
Zayna, I have a question for you. And it may not be good to mix pots of funding, but as you talk about, as you transitioned from VR strategies, possibly with innovation funds and opioid settlement dollars, something that is fairly new to me is the notion of recovery-friendly workplaces that support addiction recovery. Could a state use opioid settlement dollars to initiate something like that with business?
Yeah, potentially. The states have a lot of flexibility on how they use the dollars. They do have to do 70% on some of those services that I outlined, but that could even include what you're mentioning. But then they also have 30% where they have a ton of flexibility. So there's a lot of really innovative ways that states could think about this. It's a great idea.
That's great. And a comment from Drew Nagel. In Pennsylvania, it's been their experience that the decision-making about how opioid settlement dollars are allocated is decided at the county level, and there are 66 of those. It would be nice to have maybe a more centralized decision-making.
Yeah. There, again, every state is different. There's also dollars that go directly to county government. And so it does create challenges for sure.
Last question for you for now. For states' opioid advisory committees, is there a site that lists where states are in terms of providing those services?
Yes, we will send you a list of all of the states, their opioid advisory committee. It also includes what they've spent dollars on or what the committee is prioritizing. And so I definitely should have said, really, as a first step, we recommend looking at if the advisory committee has some kind of plan put out, or looking at what the dollars that they're already spending and seeing if there's ways that you can integrate brain injury into what you know the priorities are. But absolutely, in follow-up, we will send you that list of resources. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next opportunity. Derek already talked a little bit about this, the American Rescue Plan Act, and there's actually two different pots of money through this that we're going to chat about. The first is funding that has gone to the state government. State governments were allocated a large pot of money, and every state received a certain amount through ARPA. and they have to allocate the money by December 31st of this year and then spend it by the end of 2026. States can spend the dollars in a number of different ways. Some ways include helping communities and households that are affected by COVID pandemic, paying essential workers, supporting programs or services for people who suffered because of the pandemic or didn't have as much funding, providing money for healthcare, for preventing violence, for managing COVID, and helping to support various nonprofits. This is also super flexible funding amount. And every state has allocated a different amount of funding so far. And unless a state has allocated really 100% of its funding, there may still be an opportunity to have this funding allocated. Some states have really already spent all of their dollars. Some states have spent only about half of their dollars. And even if your state has spent or allocated about 100% of their funding, you could still review what it is that they're spending their dollars on and see if there's any way to integrate brain injury into those services. And again, we will send you another list that has all of the states, how much of their funding they've allocated and what they have allocated their dollars on. Some things that states have used their state funding on is addressing holistic approaches for things like mental health and substance use disorder, education, and job training and placement. A lot of states have focused on trauma and helping to expand access to services to children and families, which obviously there's the brain injury tie there. Funding for crisis intervention training and prevention related to behavioral health or other topics, and funding to nonprofits such as brain injury associations or brain injury alliances. There's a lot of different ways that states are spending dollars. There may be states who are using their state funding for brain injury that we're not aware of, but we think there's a lot of opportunity to either integrate into some of the ways that they're already spending their dollars or work with the state to allocate their remaining dollars for these services. Under the American Rescue Plan Act, there's also the temporary 10 percentage points to the federal medical assistance percentage FMAP for home and community-based services. And states have already been required to submit an initial spending plan with semi-annual updates to CMS on how to allocate those dollars. But there's still some navigation of the process, updating proposals, distributing funds. So there's still some opportunity to engage. This is the opportunity that Derek mentioned earlier. That means utilizing. So in addition to Derek, we know folks are using that dollar to bolster workforce, address equity, support family caregivers, and invest in behavioral health and co-occurring conditions. So to really think about this and how you can utilize these dollars, again, we would recommend that you review how the state has allocated the dollars for the state funding, and we will send a resource and follow-up that kind of highlights that, see how much money they might have. States have typically put out press releases or other information about their priorities for their remaining dollars, even if they haven't allocated them. So, do some research to think about how you might be able to best integrate into that funding opportunity. And then reach out to the governor's office. The governor's office typically is the lead for the state dollars and how those are spent in coordination with all of the various state agencies. And then for the home and community-based services funding, you will want to review their current plan and process, see if there's ways to integrate into that, and then coordinate with your Medicaid director. again, you may or may not need to provide education or on brain injury, but will want to come with recommendations on how to utilize those dollars and may need to coordinate with other state agencies depending on the process in the state. Derek, is there anything you would add given your experience in this?
I just put it in the chat too. I was just going to add that it's not too late to especially for the home and community-based services investment funds to create new ideas and to bring those forward for the states to consider. It was a presentation that I attended a few months ago with Community Housing of Maine, in which they had brought in a wheelpad of Vermont that really started the idea of talking about how we could leverage those funds to create or to purchase accessible units that could attach to a person's home to support individuals who have these needs for accessible living. And so it really is never too late to bring forward your idea and talk about how you can have that funded and what sort of outcomes you're looking for.
Thank you, Derek. Maria, any specific questions on this?
Not so far. I have some other questions to pose for you at the end.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, the last opportunity that I wanted to highlight are called earmarks or community project funding. This is going to be the most similar to a grant process, but is pretty different too. So over the last couple of years, members and senators have been able to submit funding in the appropriations bills for state governments and nonprofits, and the funding is earmarked for a specific project. As I'm sure you've all seen in the news, the appropriations process is very unknown. There's a lot of ups and downs, but the community project funding, even throughout that, has been maintained so far. It was included in the last 2 years, and then this year, so far, the conversation, it sounds like there will be. And so we expect there could be another opportunity for community project funding again this year. There are certain topics that a project must be focused on, but it is really flexible. So the member of Congress can say, I want funding for Maine's brain injury program for this. And they have a lot of flexibility within these certain topics that they need to fit in. The average award size for this funding last year was $2 million, but different projects get different dollar amounts. So it depends on the topic and focus of it. While it is not a grant, it is still competitive. Members and senators typically are limited in the number of community project funding earmarks that they're allowed to submit. And so you do typically have to submit an application to that member of Congress. Every member of Congress's application is going to look a little bit different. Last year, the deadlines were between April and May. And the deadline depends on the topic that you're submitting for. And typically you only have about 2 to 3 week warning. And so that's why we wanted to bring it up today and get folks thinking about what they might want to spend dollars on if they want to pursue this, because once the application comes out, it's a pretty quick turnaround time. No matter what you want to focus on, community support is essential. It's really the #1 thing the member of Congress wants to see, that you have broad coalition of support, because they really want it to be solid, kind of non-controversial projects. So they might look for that in articles or news about a project and letters of support from local elected officials, those types of things. It's also important to show that there might be some effectiveness in the project, and also that there might be some scalability. So if you propose a certain dollar amount, that what you could do with a percentage of that, because as you go through the negotiations and the appropriations process, your funding might be decreased a little bit. Here are previous examples of the types of topics. We don't expect guidance for this year to come out for another month or so. So this might change, but these are maybe some types of things that you'll want to think about. So they, in the past years, have focused on substance use disorder or mental health treatment services, improving or creating new opportunities for older adults, people with disabilities, and others to fully participate in their communities, funding for crisis intervention training or courts training, and other community development programs. Again, these are very broad. So within courts training, they could say a whole bunch of things. Could be training for brain injury, could be screening and supporting people within a treatment court for people with brain injury. They really have very wide variety of flexibility in what they're able to focus these dollars on. And so to pursue this opportunity, you'll want to maybe develop some ideas on what might need funding or what you might want to spend these dollars on. Once the official guidance is released, NASHIA will send out information that you can review on how to apply. You want to reach out to your specific member of Congress and potentially your 2 senators for them to all submit an earmark on your behalf. And every member of Congress, every senator will have a different process on what their application looks like. But regardless of what that application is, you'll want to really ensure you have that strong community support. Okay, before I move on, any specific questions on earmarks?
One question for you. How developed should those ideas be?
For now, I would just have some kind of high level ideas within those pots that you have. And then as soon as the guidance comes out, you'll want to come to your member of Congress with a pretty fully thought out idea and concept. But for now, I would keep it very high level and thinking about the types of things you might want to spend so that you have some flexibility when the official guidance comes out.
And if someone's with a state agency, are they able to ask for the earmark themselves?
Depends on your rules within your state, but state agencies are able to be funded through the program, and we're happy to provide some language or examples to your team to highlight the opportunity for them and talk about how this fits in within education activities.
And where would individuals find the kind of guidance that you're referencing, Zeta? I believe you mentioned that that would be prepared soon.
Yes, the appropriations committees on both the House and Senate side provide guidance. And as soon as that comes out, we will compile it and share it with you. But if you want to keep an eye out, you can look on the Senate Appropriations Committee or House Appropriations Committee website. It is a pretty complicated process, so we can help to dispense it down so that it's available for folks.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I just have a couple more slides before we can open up to more general questions. I think we just wanted to provide some tips and tricks as you think through all of these various funding opportunities. I will say this is from my experience in government affairs, and as I've helped partners with building partnerships, but I know that you guys are really the experts within your state and what will work best there. Derek is a great resource again at thinking innovatively and can provide additional ideas along with Judy and Marie on our team as former state government employees who have done this. But some things that I would think about is, you just got to make the first contact, reach out and try and develop those relationships, to think strategically and creatively, like we've mentioned, about the various different funding opportunities, what your state cares about and is prioritizing. You may need to educate folks, and sometimes even just that initial meeting of highlighting the huge overlap of brain injury with substance use disorder, for example, can really be pivotal. As we mentioned, come with ideas about how those dollars might be spent. think globally, really look across the across the state government about all of the different various agencies and how there might be dollars everywhere. And then have the long view. Sometimes they'll reach out and there won't be a funding opportunity right away or even an opportunity to partner, but there could be down the line, and really developing and engaging in those relationships can have a positive impact for the future. Derek, is there anything you'd like to add here?
No, just to really just emphasize just reaching out, making that first contact. A lot of times I hear from individuals who had really great ideas, they just didn't sort of take that leap of faith to share those ideas with somebody, and sometimes it's just that one person to hear you have a great idea to bring that forward.
To end, we just want to say NASHIA wants to be your partner in this. We can help you determine the different funding opportunities, think through what your state might care about, develop ideas for it, and brainstorm, kind of a formation of a concept, help you develop white papers, write applications, and then help with the capacity if you are awarded. We'd love to help to coordinate, be project managers, look for ways to utilize some of NASHIA's tools, regardless of kind of what you're thinking about in the partnership. We really want you to think of us as a resource through this. And that is all I have. Do we have questions?
We do have a few more questions, and thank you both so much for covering all of that information. That's pretty comprehensive amount of resources that people can access. I would say, to add to Derek's comment, sometimes you have a great idea, but maybe the timing's not right. That doesn't mean to throw the idea away. Hang on to it and apply it to something else. Would you agree?
Definitely, and certainly, as administrations change in government, sometimes an idea that one administration may balk at for various reasons because it's not within their priorities, the next administration may really want to take that and run with it.
I also think like we said, it's really about the long game. You got to take the long view, and even that initial idea something might not come of it right then, but then that person will think about it when they're at another state agency or when there's a new funding opportunity out there.
For sure. An earlier question that was posed to you in reference to the opioid dollars. Any suggestions on a persuasive argument to be made to access those dollars?
I am curious both of your thoughts. I think from our experience, I'll share our experience working at the federal level. What has really been compelling is, again, just education on the overlap. I think a lot of folks don't realize how much overlap there is with substance use disorder and brain injury. And as soon as you just provide a little bit of high level facts, folks realize like, oh, I am serving people with brain injury, or these systems are supporting people with brain injury. And oftentimes maybe that the brain injury is a causal factor in their substance use disorder challenges. But I'm curious, Derek and Maria's thoughts too.
Well, there's a suggestion in the chat. I think it makes for a good argument. Thank you, Bree. There are new guidelines out from the American Society of Addiction Medicine that include, some information on neurologic informed care, which might make for a really solid argument. Derek, I think I talked over you.
No, that's fine. That's exactly right. There are definitely new guidelines. And then also, to speak to the long game, I know in Maine, there's a lot of sort of historical knowledge, a lot of sort of institutional practices and sort of silos. And as you think about how do you leverage all your agencies together to sort of break down those silos and really talk about, look, like this person with the brain injury or or survived an overdose and you're struggling with supporting them, let's think about what those reasons are, and let's talk about how we can, make some adjustments in the service system. And a lot of that can be around brain injury education, brain injury support, screening. A lot of times they may have a quick screening tool, but they're not using OBIS, so they're not using a really comprehensive tool that's going to help them to go to that next step. So I think it's just sort of important to kind of talk about the facts and the data and why it's important and how is it going to support people in the long run. And always, if it can save money, if you have an argument that talks about how you can save the state dollars, that's always a winning argument.
Great point. That's something that Becky just echoed, that addressing brain injury saves money long term by connecting people to supports. Something else I placed in the chat earlier is individuals with brain injury are more susceptible to opioids. They're prescribed opioids at a higher rate, and they tend to misuse at a higher rate. So that is a statistic you could certainly use as some rationale. Another question for you, any advice for an organization that is not located in one single state? Maybe it's established in California, but the entire team is remote and spread out with a national focus.
Sorry, Derek, it looked like you're going to jump in.
I was just thinking that through. I think, many different agencies sort of pop in my mind, and I think for me, understanding the value for how it's going to impact people in Maine. If somebody is remote and they're in Maine, or they're a different agency and they're trying to move into to support people in Maine, I think as much information as you can know about that state and then how it's going to benefit the state. I think no matter where you're located, then that's always an easier foot in the door.
Good idea.
Yeah, that's great.
Any possibility to intersect intimate partner violence initiatives or projects with opioid dollars, or is that too big a stretch?
Not too big of a stretch, I think. In both the opioid dollars and the ARPA dollars, supporting people who have experienced intimate partner violence are definitely within those scopes. There could be something really interesting with the opioid dollars in helping to think through supporting intimate partner violence survivors in the criminal legal system who may also have substance use disorder. I'm sure, given all that we know, I'm sure many of those have brain injury. So.
Great. Are you aware of any specific funding avenues that target the overlap for support of brain injury survivors with mental health needs in outpatient care?
I think there could be several different opportunities that could be utilized for that. I will say most funding opportunities, unfortunately, are not recognizing brain injury maybe within the solicitation or within the focus. And so again, we have to think creatively about educating folks about why brain injury should be part of those. I think honestly, some of the suggestions we've talked about, like some of the ARPA dollars, might be a good fit for some of that activity, but can think through it a little bit more as well. I don't know, Derek, if you have other thoughts.
I mean, I was just going to say that's part of the reason why we really are using those ARPA HCBS dollars to so we have a project to really look at developing a neurobehavioral sort of model of care within Maine, and so we have those funds, we have support with NASHIA and others to help us think through that. And part of thinking through that is making sure we're having our Office of Behavioral Health involved, making sure that we're having our Office of Child and Family Services involved, because all of those state agencies, we do, they do serve individuals with brain injury, and sort of making those connections and maybe it still might look like not a lot of collaboration. So I think we're thinking about just starting now with this neurobehavioral treatment model, and then thinking about how can we then integrate into, you know, some of those community behavioral health centers and those other programs down the road.
Great. I think that we have touched on every question that has been placed in the chat or the Q&A. Any final remarks from either of you before we close out?
Derek, I'll let you go first.
Sure. No, I'm just happy to talk always about leveraging funding and how state and providers and agencies we can work together to stretch the dollars, especially as we sort of look at the future and how can we make improvements.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for joining, for your thoughtful questions. Please consider Derek and I resources. And again, NASHIA would love to help support your work in this space, and really appreciate your partnership and your willingness to think creatively about ways to support systems for brain injury within your state.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. I see one last question about waivers and getting assistance with waivers, and that is something that you guys covered. There is some TA that's available, and if you want to go back and look at the archived webinar and slides, you can see those resources listed. If you want more information about the neurobehavioral health model in Maine, I imagine Derek would be happy if you emailed him to ask about that.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're so glad that you joined us. We hope that you enjoyed today's event and you found it beneficial for trying to secure some new funding avenues in your own state within your own programs. We would love for you to join us for other training events that we host, as well as taking a look at any of our products, our resources, our leading practices academies. You see a list of some of the upcoming trainings in front of you, but we have much, much more that you can find on our website. Please contact us if you want notification of future trainings, and if you'd like more technical assistance related to securing funding opportunities. I know that Zeta would be happy to entertain any requests that you have for that level of assistance. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.